The Orville is a show that is really surprisingly good, mainly because of how the show was marketed and how the show initially began. Now, this video will mainly be about the Orville's excellent third season, since it's been a while since I've watched the show's first and second seasons, but it would be amiss of me to not mention the show's rough beginnings. The Orville was marketed to me and everyone else as this Star Trek parody from the guy who made Family Guy, and honestly, I was perfectly okay with that. I know that the reception to Family Guy only seems to worsen with every year, as most people seem to recognise that the show is past its prime. It's another case of The Simpsons, where it went on just a little too long and people got tired of it. However, Family Guy was at one point an excellent show with very funny writing, at least in my opinion. And when you introduce this brand new show that's being written by the same guy that made that show, I ultimately expected the show to have a few chuckles in store for me. Bear in mind that Seth MacFarlane has not been a writer on Family Guy since 2005, so its current state has nothing to do with him. I remember watching the first episode of The Orville with the belief that this was going to be a spoof of Star Trek, and coming out the other end thinking, yeah, this is a spoof of Star Trek. The design of the Orville ship, the costumes, the alien designs, it screamed Star Trek knockoff. Add to that the comedy, which I'm going to admit was very hit and miss, almost 50-50. It seemed like the show was exactly what we had been told it was. However, something interesting happened. The show actually tackled topical and non-topical themes with a level of maturity and respect that most shows don't. Now, the iffy comedy still remained, but you could tell that there was a diamond in the rough with this show. They just needed to polish it. In fact, the episode that brought me fully on board with the show was the Krill episode. It was such a dark episode and greatly contrasted with the light-hearted fluff we had been presented with previously. The Mocklin episode may have showed that the characters and viewers may not get the happy ending that they wanted, but the Krill episode showed that this was a universe that deserved to be feared, that for all the hijinks our heroes go on, there is actual evil out there and actual threats to our characters. It's this episode onwards that the show really found its feet and trimmed the fat, leading to great episodes like the Kalon invasion. Now, not every episode is a winner, but it is striking how many there are. I think there was only one episode that I didn't like in Season 3, mainly because it felt like the writers were trying to find a way to incorporate a previous storyline into the episode, and it just didn't quite work for me. Usually, this tactic works wonders for me, and is one of the best parts of The Orville, as the show is very aware of its history, and it's great to see certain characters weaponize this history when they argue. However, for the episode where the characters are in near-death situations, it didn't quite work. Fortunately, not only are most episodes good, they are great. Better yet, they are unpredictable. There are so many twists and turns and betrayals and alliances that come out of nowhere. In a lesser show, these heel turns would have felt inconceivable and unlikely, but in The Orville, they feel natural. You can tell that the writers for this show really think about and discuss the show behind the scenes. They do not half-ass this show, and clearly put in a lot of effort to make this science fiction show as believable as they possibly can. Another pleasant surprise is the CGI. Not every bit of CGI in The Orville is particularly good, but there are some moments where The Orville looks rather beautiful. If I was to make a comparison, the CGI is probably on a par with a Disney Plus show, so sometimes it looks great, others not so much. Now let's talk the characters. Admittedly, I feel the same way about the characters in this show as I do the episodes and the CGI. Some of them are great, some of them not so much. Kelly has never really clicked with me, and neither has her romance with Ed. She's a very important character, but I usually enjoy the storyline she's in more than the fact that she's a part of that storyline. I also do hope that they drop the romance subplot between her and Ed, because I just don't buy it. I'd prefer it if both characters move on to someone else, especially Ed, as Seth MacFarlane has great chemistry with most of the supporting characters that are brought into the show. I'm also not really a fan of Tala. This is more due to screen time than anything else. She was a new addition to the cast in Season 2, and I was looking forward to her having a bigger presence in the third season. But unfortunately, her character was pushed to the side for most of the season. She's an interesting character that I hope they do more with. It's been so long since Alara left the show that I can't remember how I felt about her character, but I'm pretty sure I liked her character, and I remember thinking her final major episode was really good. Charlie Burke was the new addition to the Orville cast this season, but I will confess, I really didn't like her character. Obviously, I like Isaac, so she instantly soured me to her when she was very horrible towards him. I understand why, and it is a realistic reaction, but it meant that her character ended up feeling very one-note to me. Whenever she was on screen, Isaac usually was too, and it resulted in her character coming across as constantly angry and annoyed. The actress was great in the role, but I wish they hadn't killed her off because there was a lot that I think the show should have ended up doing with the character, despite the thematic reasons to kill her. Now, Gordon would also be a very one-note character that I didn't like, if it wasn't for the fact that he's really funny. Scott Grimes is excellent as a character, and any time that he's on screen, you're just waiting for him to crack a joke. The show may have reduced the comedy as time has gone on and focused on more serious subject matter, but I like that Gordon is primarily the character that is carrying the torch for comedy in this series. It makes him very endearing, even when the episode isn't about him. You're just glad that he's there. Now, Lamar was a character that I initially didn't care for. There was nothing wrong with him or Jay Lee's performance, but he kind of felt like Gordon's less interesting sidekick. He was the Robin to Gordon's Batman. However, he was no Dick Grayson or Jason Todd. He was more of a Stephanie Brown. However, I really appreciated the reveal of his hidden inner intelligence, and it made his character really stand out to me. Yeah, he can still be goofy and say dumb things that get him in serious trouble with Claire, but he's much more than I originally thought he would be, and I'm glad that the show took the time to peel back the layers on his character. I know I say Gordon is this show's funny character, but in reality it's Bortus. Bortus is a hilariously deadpan character, and I'm glad that Season 3 focused very heavily on him. I love the relationship between him, his daughter, and Clyden, a character who finally received a lot of much appreciated development. I love that we get to see a much more emotional side to the monotone guy, and he cracks me up just as much or perhaps even more than Gordon does. Isaac is a very intriguing character. He's clearly this show's Spock or Data, but I'm actually unsure as to whether Isaac will ever develop emotions. Yeah, he briefly had emotions this season, and it was great to see Mark Jackson get to move his face muscles for once, but the show very quickly nipped the emotions in the bud. I'm genuinely unsure as to whether Isaac will regain these feelings, as he has clearly changed due to his time on the Orville, and does act differently to the other Kaelon. But is this him doing things subconsciously, or has his programming come to the conclusion that this is how he should act? I really do hope that Isaac regains his emotions, as it would lead to some great narrative, especially as Isaac is essentially immortal, and we'll have to watch as Claire and her children grow up and die. I think this would be better if Isaac has emotions, as we get to see how one handles this knowledge. Speaking of Claire, no character in this show has grown on me more than her. She comes across as wise and kind, and she's the sort of person anyone would come to for help, which is the perfect characterization for the Orville's doctor. I can't deny that I did initially find her relationship with Isaac to be weird, and something that I didn't expect, but now I really enjoy it, especially since it was revealed that Isaac does love Claire, even if he can't process that he does. Out of every character in this show, Claire feels the most human, and I'm glad that like Bortus and like Isaac, Season 3 focused on her character very heavily. All that's left is our main man himself. Ed is a magnificent character, and you totally understand why he's the captain of the Orville. He measures his decisions before making them and always seeks others' counsel. He comes across as an intelligent and a worthy leader. He's able to separate his feelings from the situation and make difficult choices, regardless of how much it bothers him. Like the show, he is surprisingly excellent, and I love whenever he takes centre stage on the show, since he's usually the character who has to admonish others and sort out the tricky situations that others have caused for themselves or the Orville. Ed feels like the personification of the show's writer's room to me, as he acts like how I think the writers do, discussing the pros and cons of every decision and reminding himself of his own culture and the cultures of all the different alien species. To put it simply, the ship has a great captain at the helm. Apparently, it's 50-50 on whether we'll get another season of the Orville, and I really hope we do. As good as this season finale was, it may actually be my favourite episode of the entire show. I really do want more from this show. I know that Star Trek fans aren't very happy at the moment, what with Picard's and Star Trek Discovery's existence. I won't talk about these shows any further, since I haven't actually seen them, and for all I know, I might actually like them. Plus, I haven't actually seen any of the original Star Trek shows, only the new movies for me, sorry. But it's very clear that for a lot of people, the Orville has scratched that Star Trek itch, while still being able to be its own thing. The Orville is not a Star Trek parody, or some spoof. Fortunately, it's not even a cheap knockoff. The Orville is Star Trek's spiritual successor, and I hope that we get to go on many more adventures with the Orville's crew one day.